so over time, I was able to shift that mindset to, I love the game of basketball, of sports. How could I integrate my love for that into something other than playing? And that led me into pro sports. And, there, as I mentioned earlier, is where I discovered, what, it's possible to do more than just make a living. How about making a difference too? And so that kind of guided me in all of my future career decisions, to find organizations that shared kind of the same values as I did, that were all about being exceptional, and that treated their customers and employees in a world-class way.
Welcome and hello, everyone. John Fenton here, the CEO of Sensei, and I'm so excited to have my guest, Jamey Lutz. Jamey, how are you?
I am doing great today. Hope you are as well, John.
Doing fantastic. Jamey's a senior executive with ChenMed in the Atlanta area. He's an author. He's really an accomplished, has a great resume of experience in all different really cool places and cool environments, including in sports and the Orlando Magic and the Ritz-Carlton organization. And it seems like, Jamey, throughout your career, what's really been passionate for you is around culture and customer experience. And I'm wondering, how did you get into that? What was your passion for getting into that line of business, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to talk about that, John. And actually, that I cover quite a bit of that in my new book, Pathway to Purpose. Coming out of college, I'm a North Carolinian, went to the University of North Carolina, big time basketball fan, and was not good enough to play at a college or pro level, but did get an opportunity to do an internship with the Orlando Magic coming straight out of college. And I talk about in my book how I was working as a public relations intern, probably 50, 60 hours a week. And back then, John, you could get away with not paying interns for the most part. So I was unpaid. But also to help kind of support myself on non-game nights, I was serving big fat yeast rolls at Quincy's Steakhouse there in the Orlando area. And, despite the fact, looking back on it now, that I was so busy and in many cases overwhelmed, I absolutely loved what I was doing. I was in a sport that I loved. I was interacting with players and top personnel within the Magic. And despite the fact I wasn't getting paid, I was like, what would it be like to actually have a career doing something that you loved? And for that reason, I've always kind of looked for opportunities to be a part of organizations that were all about world-class. So world-class service, world-class employee engagement, world-class performance results. And I've been really, really blessed, John, to work with a number of organizations that kind of fit that bill.
That is so cool. And tell me, you have any stories about your days with the Magic? I think when you were there, they had signed Shaquille O'Neal and some other great players. Anything you want to share there?
Yeah, what's interesting is, as I was applying for that internship, and by the way, I sent out resumes to all of the NBA teams hoping to get an internship. And so it turned out I got one with the Magic, and hadn't really spent a lot of time in Orlando up until that point. And the Magic, I think, were only like 3 or 4 years in. They were a brand new team along with the Heat. And I didn't really know a lot about the team. And it turns out not many people did. But as soon as they won the lottery with the ping pong ball and ended up getting this huge guy out of LSU, 350 pounds, 7'1", Shaquille O'Neal, everything suddenly changed. And we became kind of the eye of the NBA, the center point of the NBA for several years to come, just because of the charisma and the absolute strength and power that Shaquille brought to the game.
Really cool, really cool. And I've had some experience being around athletics and stuff when I was in college. I had good fortune to play some college football with some great players, and it's really cool to kind of be around them. And I imagine being in a sports organization, you learned a lot about teamwork and culture and all these kinds of things.
We really did. And the Magic, at that time were all about, and they probably still are. I don't want to say they're not now, but they were all about becoming world class,
Mhm.
in every way. And certainly having Shaquille and then Penny Hardaway help from a performance standpoint on the floor. But the Magic, whenever they traveled, would generally stay at, a Four Seasons or Ritz-Carlton. And we had, and I was a part of that, an opportunity to start really interacting with some of the executives within the Ritz-Carlton, Horst Schulze and others at the time. And that really kind of whet our appetite for what would it look like, not just from a world championship perspective, but what would it look like to be the best sports organization in the world? And that's what we sought out to achieve while I was there and after when I left. But it was, and from what I understand, is still a great organization that's committed to, really checking all the boxes from the standpoint of being excellent in all areas.
Really good, really cool. So you wrote a book, Pathway to Purpose. It's right here. And tell me what prompted you to write that book?
I think everybody has a different kind of reason for wanting to write a book. As my career's kind of progressed, and I've experienced so many different things about organizational culture and performance excellence and customer experience. I felt like I've been blessed to gain a lot of insights and a lot of kind of firsthand boots on the ground kind of experience. And, I begin to feel like there's stuff inside of me I really need to get out. I really feel like I need to share what I've seen and what I've been involved with in terms of creating what I call irresistible cultures. And for that reason, it took me a while, which I think it does a lot of people, to finally get it on paper and to get it out. But it was definitely something that had been in me for a while, and I just needed to really focus and get it done. And so for that reason, I'm really excited that it's out now.
So you mentioned a bit in your book about there's a story about your experience, first time going to Ritz-Carlton. Can you share more about that?
Yeah, so I was with the Magic at the time, and again, we had begun to develop. The Magic had some relationships with folks at the Ritz because we wanted to emulate guest experience versus fan experience, and employee engagement, as well. And I had, through my interactions with the Ritz, said I would love to be a part of your organization. My passions are culture, quality, customer experience, and ended up getting a call, John, from what was then the Ritz-Carlton Palm Beach. So I was in Orlando, so it was about 3.5, 4 hours down to Palm Beach. And at that time, Ritz-Carlton had a position, an executive role position called the Director of Quality, the DOQ. And that person was kind of responsible for the service experience and service recovery and service measurement at each of the properties. And so in my story, I talk about going down to the Ritz-Carlton that first time to interview. And we had an old school German general manager named Wolfgang Baer. And Mr. Baer was, he was quite a character. He was somewhat old school in that he expected a lot, and he would let you know it for sure. But I was infatuated from the very beginning when he told me, look, this is not for everybody. This organization is not. You either have the heart of a servant, or you're not going to survive here. And that was like, okay, this is the type of organization that I can really get behind in terms of one that's committed to excellence and wants to do the right thing for the right reasons. So that was a great experience. It was a little intimidating, but I was very, very glad that I took that dive and ended up being with the Ritz that first time around 2.5 years, and then rejoined the Ritz later in my career as well.
I know the Ritz has been renowned for what the golden, what is it, the gold
Gold.
standard, I think they, right? And a whole bunch of other things that they talk about,
Yep.
mission statement, all these things. What's one or two takeaways from your experience leading, being a integral part of their culture and at the Ritz-Carlton? What are some things that you've taken away from that experience?
Yeah, you know, and
that others maybe like?
if I had my wallet here, John, even after all these years, and I've been gone for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, I still have my Credo card. And the Credo card
Mhm.
is the plastic card that has all of the gold standards on it. So the three
Mhm.
steps of service, the employee promise, the customer experience
Mhm.
saying that we had. You know, I think more than anything else, what stood out to me is this concept of ingraining what your organizational values are into your culture. So you can't just talk about it once or twice or three times. That Credo card became part of our DNA. It became part of who we are. And so we would cover a piece of that uh, those gold standards every day. So as an example, our three steps of service are real simple: warm welcome, anticipate the guest needs, and provide a fond farewell. Pretty simple, but not always easily executed. And so
Mhm.
at every huddle, we had a huddle every day, every shift at every organization around the world. We reinforced one of our gold standards. And after a while, it becomes part of who you are. And so, you know, that along with this just real passion and empowerment to do whatever it took to take care of our guest.
Mhm.
Those are some of the things that stood out to me more than anything.
That's really important. I think that I think a lot of companies miss the boat when they don't. It's frequency and repetition and that huddle. I love the huddle. I was a center in college. So I love the term huddle
Yeah,
anyway, right? And so it's that huddle, right? It's getting people together, and it's sometimes it sounds a little cheesy, right? But actually, it's so meaningful, isn't it, to the people?
it does, you know, and what better way to reinforce what's important to you is collectively within your department, within your work group every day, and not just to read them out. It wasn't about memorizing them, John.
Mhm.
It was about internalizing them. It
Mhm.
was about, okay, give me an example of how we demonstrate empowerment, or give me an example of how we're involved in the planning of the work that involves us. It was about making it a reality, making it real in the lives of the ladies and gentlemen. And
Mhm.
I believe, you know, there's lots of things that Ritz has done right over the years, but I think that thing more than anything else has been foundational to their success.
Absolutely. And tell me about shift gears a little bit. Tell me about, from your perspective, leadership. How do you define leadership?
Yeah, leadership is to me um, pushing people or influencing people to do what they would not normally do so that they can achieve what they would not normally achieve. So to me, leadership is all about influence. And as you know, John, you don't get to decide whether you're a leader. Others get to decide whether you're worth following or not. And you know, the only way, in my opinion, to really truly lead is to have the best interest of your people in mind, to know what makes them tick, to understand what their purpose is, and to help them get there along the way. When people want to follow you, then you've got a really great recipe to drive success in your organization.
Well, such a big responsibility, right? And it's something that I teach a lot and share about. You got to know your people. Some of the best executives that I knew, or best even like coaches, right? They knew they knew the talents, the skills, the unique ability of each of their people and organization, and they could position them in the right place for success, right? And they were really in tune with that. And they spent a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to. You can't know everybody in the organization, but at least your direct reports, maybe the next line down, to know what their talents and skills are, to help them be the best they can be, right? I mean, that's really, I think, a big part of it.
That's right. And you mentioned at the very beginning, it's a huge responsibility. And you're right. I think it was Simon Sinek talked about the fact that, you know, it outside of our spouse or significant others, we are the most influential person in our teams or our people's lives. And that does come with a big responsibility. I don't know about you, but I certainly don't want to be one where they come home and talk negatively about me. I want to be someone that, hey, when they look back on their career someday, they point to me and say, hey, that person made a difference in my life. They
Yeah.
really honestly cared.
Yeah, and that's really what matters. I think. I think back of some of the leaders that I worked with, and I was fortunate enough to work with the same firm for over 30 years, and I saw the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And as we all do in our experiences, and the ones that really genuinely were authentic and they cared, really had made a big impact.
That's right. Yeah,
You know?
and you're right. I think that I use a lot of metaphors, as you just mentioned, with sports. I mean, I think in many cases we look back on the coaches that we that worked with us as kids or youth or college or whatever, and um, generally it's either a very positive experience or a very negative
Mhm.
one. But
Mhm.
those positive ones are ones that I think we should all, aspire to emulate.
Yeah, it's so hard to be a leader, especially nowadays. It's so complex, and it's like just a cascade of ambiguity and uncertainty and all these kinds of things. So, what do you think it is? If you were to counsel a leader right now, what do you think would be something that would be really important for them to grab onto to help them be authentic and be the best leader they could be? What do you think?
Yeah, I think, and I'll just kind of continue the sports metaphor. I think, traditionally we've thought of managers, and to me, managers are all about controlling process versus coaches, which are all about helping their people grow. And I think if we take on that traditional kind of coach role, um, again, earning trust, creating a organization where people find psychological safety, they feel comfortable being themselves. Now you can't let them, you can't not have accountability measures in place, right? It's also very much performance based. But when people know that you care, then they are more likely and in most cases more willing to do whatever is necessary to help the organization and the customers be successful.
You mentioned psychological safety, and it's something that I read in a Harvard Business Review article a few years ago. And tell me, and tell the people watching and listening what psychological safety means.
Yeah, and I won't go into it because it's a pretty long story, but
Yeah.
Google actually did a project a number of years ago to better understand what successful teams within the Google organization, what made them most successful. And it wasn't the intellect or IQ of the individuals that made up a particular team. It wasn't that they had, common likes and hobbies or that type of thing. It was a sense of, what, I can be myself in this group. And so if I disagree with something, I can respectfully say, hey, I think there's maybe a better way for us to do this team. Or if I don't feel like the pathway that the organization is taking is the right one, then I have the authority and actually the expectation that I'm going to speak up and say something. So psychological safety is really just a sense of I can speak my mind in a respectful manner, and that opens up the sky, as you can imagine, for collaboration, creativity. Whereas if I don't feel psychologically safe, then chances are I'm going to keep my mouth shut, and I'm just going to go along with the crowd, and we're not going to have that level of collaboration and creativity.
That's a really good point. I in my career, I started with a very, very large firm, very large company, worldwide organization. And then I had also worked for a Fortune 1000 company for a period of time. And then the firm that I worked with was a large company, but not to the magnitude of these other two very large companies and organizations. And the cultures were night and day. Cultures were night and day. And the firm that I worked with for over 30 years was the one that I really felt like I contributed, and I actually felt valued. right?
Yes.
I wasn't looking over my shoulder, right? About,
Yes.
because I saw a lot of politics being played and a lot of, kind of infighting and stuff going on behind the scenes and in those other organizations. And I just knew that wasn't the place for me.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting as I've walked in organizations, worked with organizations, and worked for them. You can kind of pick up on it right away. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
can sense when you walk in an organization, wow, there's something different about this. I can't necessarily put my finger on it,
Mm-hmm.
but that's culture. And generally you can pick up on it very, very quickly.
So what would you say is the biggest mistakes companies make with respect to culture?
I think they see it as a program du jour. It's okay, we've done, we've focused on finance and we've focused on, um, a customer or employee experience. Now it's time to focus on culture. And they see it as a fairly fast race versus an ongoing, never ending marathon. And culture is something it takes a while to, well, everybody has a culture, whether they know it or not,
Right.
but it takes a while to mold it into what you want. But it also is equally challenging to maintain that culture over time. So I think, more than anything else, I think it's about not ever taking your eye off the ball, but always sticking to your values, your vision, your mission, and not deviating from that.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in keeping it simple too. And I know in your book, you mentioned Nordstrom. And so
Yep.
Nordstrom's had one rule, and there was no other rules other than that one rule, right? You remember that
Yep.
rule?
Yep. You're
One
going to have to, yeah, it was, if there are no other questions, so do what's best on the behalf of the customer.
Right.
If that you fail with that one, then come back to number one,
Yeah,
essentially.
exactly. Use good judgment in that in
Yeah.
that circumstance, and then come back to that one, right? It's so simple, right? That's really what you want, right? It's what you want from your people. It's what you want with people treating each other in the organization, and also with your customers, which is so important. Obviously, the lifeblood of any business, I think, are obviously the customer relationships and doing a good job and getting it right, and the energy they bring to the table, the energy
That's
they
right.
bring, and really caring about what they do, really having that passion for the purpose of the business.
Yes, exactly. And I talk about that in the book too, that I think
Mhm.
there's this balance between empowerment and accountability,
Mhm.
right? We think of accountability as this dirty word, but the best of the best want to be held accountable. What's more demoralizing than not knowing where you stand? And so I think most people worth their salt, they want to know what the score looks like. They want to know whether they're being successful. But then by the same token, if you do only accountability with no recognition, then that can become demoralizing as well. So I think you've got to make sure that people feel like they are appreciated, and that's not always financial. Just a simple word of, hey, I've been watching, I see what you're doing, what an amazing job, and I just want to thank you for that on behalf of the entire organization. That's what causes people to really want to go through walls for an organization.
It's more about your actions, right, than what you it's more than the words, right? It's about the actions and walking the talk.
That's right.
So tell me a little bit about the company you're with. You're with ChenMed, I understand, and that's an Atlanta-based company. Tell me more about ChenMed.
Yeah, and you may not know this, John, but actually they're based out of Miami. So they're where you came from. They're
Okay.
based out of South Florida, Miami, and they are a healthcare organization that has about 80, currently about 80 centers across the Southeast, I think 8 different states. And the way that we practice medicine is a little different. We focus on Medicaid Advantage, so the elderly, but specifically we focus on what's called value-based service. Value-based is upstream. So instead of treating people after they're sick, we try to identify the issues and the problems that they're having upstream before they ever get sick. So we don't get paid as an organization by Medicare if we don't show positive outcomes. And I love that method because it really forces us as an organization to not look at healthcare is transactional, but relational. And we talked about psychological trust. If your patients don't trust the PCP, the doctor, then they're not going to follow what they ask them to do. They're not going to take their medicines as they should. They're not going to practice healthy eating habits, etc. It requires trust. And that's what we really focus on, is delivering that experience that is so exceptional that our patients understand and want to be a part of what we're trying to do, which is lead them to better health.
Awesome. Very good. That's really, really good. It's a great mission.
It is. Yeah, it's great to be a part of.
So just a final question for you, and also a couple, and then you can share with people how they can connect with you or get your book. I always love to talk to leaders, business leaders, senior leaders about, pivotal moments in their lives. I call them defining moments where, something happened in their life and it helped set them on a path, maybe a pathway to purpose, if you will.
Yes.
Set them on a path for their life about what's important to them and help to shape them to be the leader they are. And so, Jamey, for you, what is there a defining moment for you that you can recall?
There are a number of defining moments for me. One that I would probably shed the light is play basketball in high school. Was good, certainly not great, but tore my ACL, my anterior cruciate ligament in my knee after my junior year, and that pretty much ended my career. Back then, it was really, I know you've had a lot of sports situations as well. Back then, it was difficult to come back from that. And what I came to realize, it was devastating, that I wasn't going to be able to play in high school, and I would not have been a Division I type person, but I may have been able to play in a smaller college environment. But I began to discover that I was placing all of my value in what I did versus who I was. So I think that mind shift that I had to go through in high school, where again, I began to understand it's not necessarily what I do, it's what I make of what I do and actually who I am. That is, the most important thing.
Great advice. And thank you for sharing that story with us. So how can the watchers and listeners of today's conversation, how can they connect with you and how can they get a copy of your book, Pathway to Purpose?
Thanks so much, John. So the book, Pathway to Purpose, Big Ideas for Fueling Irresistible Corporate Cultures, is available on all major online retail locations, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, etc.
Okay.
You can find me at jameylutz.com. Pretty simple, jameylutz.com.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Jamey, it's been a pleasure to have you in the conversation today, and I love your focus on purpose and the irresistible corporate cultures. And I've started reading your book; it's really awesome, and I appreciate you spending some time today.
John, it's my pleasure, and I appreciate what you're doing. I've had the opportunity to watch a couple of your shows to date, and I think you're making a big difference. So I applaud you for that.
Well, I appreciate that very much, my friend. So awesome. So John Fenton here, the CEO of Sensei, with Jamey Lutz, author and just expert in thought leader in purpose and culture. Check out his book. All the information will be in the show notes along with this video. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Until next time.